There comes a moment in every life when the truth must walk into the room uninvited but undeniable. I've spent decades of my life believing in the power of truth, not gossip, not speculation, but truth. And yet today I find myself being talked about in headlines I never asked for, linked to a man whose actions I do not condone, and caught up in a narrative that isn't mine. Let me be clear, I have not, and I repeat, I have not been involved in anything connected to Sean Diddy Combs, nor have I ever stood beside behavior that harms, degrades, or manipulates another soul. People say Denzel Washington destroyed Oprah. Let me tell you something about Denzel. That man is a pillar. He is a man of principle, of faith, of discipline. If he ever had something to say to me, he'd look me in the eye and say it, not through a viral headline, not through gossip in the shadows. The truth is, people are quick to tear down what took a lifetime to build. I've seen it time and time again, especially with Black voices in power. A woman finds her strength, her light, her truth, and they come with their torches to burn it all down. But I won't let the noise of the world drown out the whisper of my soul. I've worked too hard, loved too deep, prayed too long, and stood through too many storms to let lies shake me now. I'm not here to clear my name. I don't need to. Because when you stand in truth, real, unwavering truth, you don't chase headlines, you outlast them. I have always used my platform to uplift women, to speak truth to power, and to challenge injustice. If any man, any woman is hurting others, exploiting others, they should be held accountable, period. It doesn't matter if they're famous, powerful, or rich. It matters that they are human, and humanity is what we must protect. To those who believe the headlines without question, I see you, and I forgive you. Because I know what fear and doubt can do to the mind, but I ask you now, look deeper. Don't just follow what goes viral, follow what's right. And to Denzel, if you're watching this, brother, I've always respected you. Your voice is powerful, your stance is strong. But please, if there's something you believe about me, come and sit with me. Let's talk. That's what grown folks do. That's what truth looks like. People will say anything. That's something I learned a long time ago. When you've been in the public eye as long as I have, standing in front of cameras, sitting in rooms where power meets pain, giving voice to the silenced, you learn to live with the noise. But there's a difference between noise and injustice. There's a difference between gossip and a narrative that claws at your spirit, questions your integrity, and tries to tie your name to something you have never, not for one breath, been a part of. And that's what I'm standing in front of today. Not because I have to prove myself, not because my worth needs validation, but because the truth deserves to be spoken aloud, especially when the world begins to whisper lies loud enough to become believed. When the headlines came out, when I first heard my name tied into this storm surrounding Diddy, I remember sitting in stillness, not rage, not panic, just stillness. I asked myself, how did we get here? How did a woman who has spent her life lifting others up suddenly get pulled into something that has nothing to do with her spirit, her values, her walk? The answer isn't complicated. It's what happens when people take dots that were never meant to connect and turn them into a scandal. I have met Sean Combs, yes, over decades in the entertainment industry. Paths cross. Award shows, charity galas, conversations behind the scenes. You smile. You share a moment, you move on, but don't mistake proximity for partnership. Don't mistake politeness for participation. And don't ever, not for a single second think that just because my name appears in the same sentence as someone else's, that I belong in their shadow. I want to say this clearly from my heart, so there is no room for misunderstanding. I have never supported, protected, or enabled any form of abuse, manipulation, or exploitation. If anyone, including Sean Combs, is found to have harmed others, then justice must be served. I believe that. I've always believed that. My entire platform has been built on truth-telling, on facing the darkness to let the light in. So to have that mission questioned, not by facts, not by victims, but by rumor, it cuts deep. But I do not bleed for clicks. I do not bleed for viral moment. I bleed for truth. I've watched as the internet spins narratives faster than the human heart can process them. I've watched people I love, people I've mentored, people I've sat across from and seen tears in their eyes. I've watched them be torn apart by things that aren't true. And now, I stand in the middle of it. But I am not afraid, because the truth is not fragile. It doesn't need defending, it needs declaring. And I am here to declare that I do not accept the lie that has been written on my name. There's a pain that comes from being misunderstood, and that pain is heavy because it's silent. It lives in the part of you that says, how could they think this of me? But then you remember they don't really know me. They know the version of me that's been curated, cropped, clipped, and quoted. They don't know the prayers I've prayed. They don't know the letters I've written to women in shelters. They don't know the children I've hugged after the cameras stopped rolling. And most of all, they don't know the strength it takes to keep walking when the ground under you is shaking with rumor. There will always be people who will try to pull your light into their darkness, not because they hate you, but because they haven't learned to love themselves without tearing someone else down. And that's what this is. Not justice, not journalism, just the wild hunger for something viral, something juicy, something scandalous enough to trend. But I refuse to be anyone's headline if it's not born from truth. So yes, I saw my name. Yes, I felt the sting, but I also felt something else, something more powerful. I felt purpose. I felt the voice inside me say, tell your truth. Don't be silent just because it's uncomfortable. And so I'm here, not to beg for understanding, but to remind you of who I am. I am a woman who has spent her life asking hard questions. I am a woman who has sat with the broken and the brave. And I am a woman who will never ever co-sign the suffering of another human soul. You don't have to like me. You don't have to agree with everything I've ever done. But what you can't do is lie about me and think I'll stay quiet, because silence in the face of a lie is surrender. And I don't surrender to rumors. I stand in truth. I always have, and I always will. You know, when I first heard the words that Denzel Washington, someone I have long respected and admired, had destroyed me, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not outrage, but sorrow. Sorrow that we live in a time when people will twist anything, even honor, even history, into conflict. Because the truth is that man has always been a voice of strength, of faith, of dignity. And to see his name put beside mine in such a bitter and false way, as if we are enemies at war, instead of souls on parallel paths, it breaks my heart. I've shared stages with Denzel. I've shared quiet rooms where the noise of the world fades and only real conversation remains. I've watched him speak truth when it wasn't easy, stand tall when the winds were meant to blow him over. He's never been a man who speaks lightly. And if Denzel had something to say to me, if he had a word to share about my choices, my path, my stance, I believe in my spirit that he would do it the way real people do, face to face, eye to eye, heart to heart. So when people say he destroyed you, I have to stop and ask, what does that even mean? Because my life, my spirit, my purpose, none of it can be destroyed by words whispered on the wind. I have faced storms that would make most people tremble. I faced loss, betrayal, racism, sexism, and isolation, but I kept walking. So no, a false headline isn't what destroys me. What hurts more deeply is the thought that someone I respect is being used as a weapon against me, not by his own hand, but by the hands of those who thrive on conflict they create out of air. There's a sickness in this culture where we take two black icons, two voices that have inspired generations, and we try to pit them against each other like gladiators in a digital arena. What does that say about us? That instead of honoring black excellence, we try to divide. Instead of building bridges between those who've done the work, we set fire to them for the sake of clicks and content. I won't participate in that. I can't. It goes against everything I believe, everything I've taught, everything I've stood for. If Denzel ever questioned anything about me, if he ever doubted a choice I've made, I would listen, not defensively, not to retaliate, but to understand, because that's what mature love looks like. That's what mutual respect means. We don't have to agree on everything, but we do have to see each other through the lens of truth, not internet gossip, not public pressure, not someone else's version of our relationship, our truth. The truth is, we're both human. We've both been lifted by the love of our people and bruised by their disappointment. We've both stood under lights that were too bright and carried responsibilities too heavy. We've both cried in private over pain that the world thinks we're too powerful to feel. And through it all, we've both tried, in our own ways, to remain faithful to something greater than fame. We've tried to serve something bigger than ourselves. And for that reason alone, Denzel Washington will never be my enemy, not even if the world tries to paint him as one. There's a part of me that wishes we didn't have to have this conversation, that I could just keep walking and let the lies die out on their own. But I know too well, silence is a seed that lets rumors grow, and I refuse to let the weeds of falsehood choke the truth. I've built too much, I've come too far, so I speak, not out of defensiveness, but out of devotion to truth, to legacy, to real respect. I would never speak ill of Denzel Washington, and I would never twist his words into weapons, because that's not who I am, and that's not who he is either. Whatever may have been said, in anger, in frustration, in the shadows of misunderstanding, I choose not to react with fire. I choose to respond with grace, because grace is stronger, grace lasts longer, grace leaves room for healing. So to those watching, those listening, those reading between the lines of every headline and YouTube title, know this: we are not enemies. We are not stories crafted for your entertainment. We are real people living real lives, navigating real pressure. And while the world may be hungry for drama, we are hungry for peace. And that hunger, that yearning, is what will guide me always. I pray that anyone who feels torn between believing lies and living in light finds their way back to truth. And I pray that Denzel and I, and every soul caught in these winds, remain grounded in the deeper knowing that none of this noise defines us. Only our love does, only our truth does, and that truth, my friend, is unshakable. When I look back at my life, at the thousands of interviews, the conversations that left me speechless, the tears I've wiped away, both on and off camera, one thing has remained constant: my unwavering belief in accountability. I have always believed that no matter how powerful you are, no matter how loved or feared or admired you may be, you are not above truth. You are not above justice. You are not beyond the reach of consequence. And if this moment in our culture, in our hearts, has taught us anything, it's that we can no longer afford to protect the powerful at the expense of the voiceless. We are in a time where secrets don't stay hidden. They rise like smoke through the cracks until the whole house smells of what we tried to bury. And that's not a bad thing. That's truth doing what it's always done, right? So when we talk about allegations, about victims, about abuse, when we talk about someone like Diddy, a man who has brought joy to millions, but may also have brought pain to others, we have to look it all in the eye, not turn away, not excuse it,
and certainly not shield it. We have to look at it with the kind of courage that sees the full truth, not just the parts we want to remember. I've met powerful people, I've sat beside them, smiled with them, even celebrated their victories, but I have never, not once, believed that power makes you right. Power only magnifies who you really are, and if that power is built on hurting others, on controlling others, on silencing others, then that power needs to crumble. I don't care how many records you've sold, how many red carpets you've walked, how many mansions carry your name on the gate. If you've harmed someone, then you must face what you've done, period. No commas, no conditions. Some people want to believe that if you stand next to someone, you endorse everything they've ever done. But life isn't that simple. Relationships are layered, encounters are brief. A photograph can be just that, a moment in time, not a statement of loyalty. I've stood next to thousands of people. Some of them became lifelong friends, others were passing acquaintances, and a few, yes, I later learned, were capable of things I never could have imagined. That's the painful part of this life, the not knowing, the not seeing, until it's too late. But once you know, once the truth arrives and stands in your doorway, you don't turn your back on it. You let it in, you listen, you believe, and then you act. And so I say again, as clearly as I can, I do not, and will never protect the powerful from accountability. I do not excuse the rich while the broken weep. I do not stand silent while people suffer in shadow. If there are women, men, children, anyone who has been hurt by someone with status, they deserve more than our sympathy. They deserve justice. They deserve action. They deserve to be heard, not doubted, seen, not ignored. There is no such thing as too famous to fall. There is no level of influence that grants immunity from consequences. That's not how the soul works. That's not how healing happens. We are all accountable to each other, to our ancestors, to the children watching us, to the God who sees what's done in the dark. And if we forget that, then all the power in the world becomes a prison dressed in gold. And yes, this is personal for me, because I've sat with survivors. I've held the hands of women who trembled as they told their stories for the first time. I've looked into eyes that asked, will anyone believe me? And I've promised them, I do. I've made it my mission to amplify voices, especially the ones that have been silenced by power, by fear. So when people even suggest, even whisper that I would ever protect someone accused of abuse, it is not only a lie, it is a wound to everything I've stood for. But wounds can become warnings. They can become awakening. They can teach us where our boundaries lie and what we're willing to lose to protect what's right. And if I must lose approval to stay in alignment with justice, then so be it. If I must be misunderstood for the sake of truth, I will take that burden and carry it all the way to the end. Because I didn't come this far to start compromising now. This is a reckoning, not just for the entertainment world, but for every space where silence was once the price of survival. And my prayer, my deepest prayer, is that we all start telling the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because only then will the healing begin. There's a danger we don't talk about enough, not in boardrooms, not in classrooms, and certainly not on the evening news. It's the danger of the click, that tiny effortless motion of the finger, the thing we all do hundreds of times a day without even thinking, because in that click lives power. And when power isn't grounded in truth, it turns reckless, it turns dangerous. And lately I've been on the receiving end of that danger, not because I did something wrong, but because someone, somewhere, decided that my name would look good in a headline that sells. It didn't start with me, it won't end with me. But let me tell you, when the story becomes about you, when your name gets tangled in a lie that spreads like fire across every screen, it doesn't feel like just another news cycle. It feels like a storm trying to knock the roof off the home you built with your own bare hand. And I've built my house on trust. That's what hurts the most, not the rumors themselves, but what they do to people's faith in who you are. Because in today's world, perception becomes reality faster than the truth even has time to put on its shoe. I've spent more than 4 decades building my life around the simple act of telling the truth, whether it was a truth people were ready to hear or not. I've spoken it. I've sat with survivors, activists, ministers, presidents, all kinds of people, and looked him in the eye and said, let's be real here. And now when someone puts my face beside a false claim, wraps my name in scandal I had no part in, what they're really doing is undermining the foundation of everything I've stood for. It's not just a lie about Oprah, it's an attack on the idea that truth matters. People say it's just the internet, but it's not just the internet. When you wake up and your phone is full of messages from people asking, did you see this? Is this true? Why aren't you saying anything? It's not just the internet. When you walk into a room and feel the shift in energy, people looking at you like they're not sure if you're the same person they thought you were yesterday. It's not just the internet. When young girls watching and learning from everything you do start to wonder if integrity really means anything anymore. We live in a world where algorithms decide what's worthy of attention, not facts, not nuance, not humanity, just speed and shock. And the faster something spreads, the less time we give ourselves to ask, wait, is this even real? We are drowning in content and starving for truth. And the cost is more than reputations, it's trust, it's compassion, it's the ability to see each other as more than characters in a drama someone else is writing. I've learned to breathe through it, to sit in the stillness, to remind myself that the people who know me, really know me, will not be swayed by every wind that blows through Twitter or YouTube. But I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm speaking for every person who's ever been falsely accused, misrepresented, taken out of context, or deliberately used as a pawn in somebody else's story. Because if it can happen to someone with my platform, my history, my record, imagine what happens to those without a voice at all. I am not naive. I know that public life comes with scrutiny, but scrutiny is not the same as sabotage. Critique is not the same as cruelty. Journalism is not the same as clickbait. And we as a culture need to start making those distinctions again, because the line is disappearing, and with it so is our shared sense of what's real. I'm not asking for protection, I'm asking for responsibility. I'm asking for the media, the influencers, the content creators, all of us, to pause before pressing publish, to ask, is this true? Is this fair? Is this necessary? That old rules still apply, and in a time when truth is often overshadowed by trend, asking those questions is not just good practice, it's a moral obligation. I can't stop the headlines, I can't control the whispers, but I can choose to stand in the truth of who I am. I can choose not to be reduced by rumors or distracted by distortions, and I will continue to do that for myself and for the people who believe that honesty still matters. There is a pain that doesn't come with bruises, a wound that doesn't bleed, and it doesn't show up on an X-ray or scream out loud, but it lingers. It weighs heavy on your chest, like a silence that refuses to leave. That pain is the pain of being misunderstood. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone, to be seen, but not truly seen, to be known, but only through the eyes of someone else's assumptions. And I know that feeling well. I've lived it, I've carried it, I've cried because of it, in rooms no one saw, on nights when the whole world thought I was strong and unbothered and full of grace. But grace is not the absence of grief. Grace is choosing to rise through it anyway. People think they know you. They think they've figured you out from a headline, a photo, a soundbite, taken out of a 3-hour conversation. They think she's Oprah, she's fine. But being misunderstood doesn't care about how famous you are. It doesn't ask how many books you've sold, or schools you've built, or awards you've won. It finds you in your quietest moments and whispers. They don't see who you really are. And when you see your name twisted into a version of yourself that doesn't even look like you, it shakes something inside of you. You start questioning, do they not know me at all? But the truth is, some never did, and some never wanted to, because for them, the version that fits their narrative is more useful than the reality of your truth. When people started attaching my name to a scandal I had no part in, when they began writing stories as if I was complicit in something I had never touched, never supported, never stood beside, I didn't feel anger first. I felt heartbreak. Heartbreak that decades of work, of standing up for the truth, of fighting for women, of amplifying silenced voices, could be so easily swept aside by people who had never sat across from me, who had never heard my story from my lips, who had never known the weight of the path I've walked. It made me think about all the times I've sat with women who were misunderstood, the woman who was told her pain wasn't real, the child whose voice was doubted, the man whose truth was laughed off because it didn't fit the story others wanted to hear. I felt their pain through their tears, and now I feel it in my own spirit. Being misunderstood is a kind of loneliness. You're surrounded by people, but no one sees the truth, and it's tempting, so tempting, to scream, to defend, to point fingers, to demand they get it right. But what I've learned over and over is that truth doesn't have to shout, it just has to stand still, unshaken, unmoved by the waves crashing against it. I used to think being misunderstood meant I had failed at communicating, but now I understand it sometimes just means people weren't ready to hear what's real, or maybe they were never listening in the first place. Sometimes they only want a version of you that fits their fear, or their anger, or their need for a villain in a story they're creating. And if you don't play the part, they'll write the script for you. But here's what I know deep in my bones. I'd rather be misunderstood in truth than celebrated in falsehood. I'd rather carry the pain of being misjudged than betray the integrity of who I really am. Because at the end of the day, when the world quiets down and it's just me and my reflection, I want to look into my own eyes and say, you didn't bend for them, you didn't fold to their version of you, you stood firm in your truth. That's not easy, it never is, but it's worth it. So if you've ever been misunderstood for your silence, for your boundaries, for your strength, for your softness, I see you, I feel you, I know what it means to be talked about but never truly heard. And I want to tell you what I've told myself. You are not here to make everyone understand you. You are here to honor the truth of your being. The pain of being misunderstood does not define you. It refines you. It teaches you what voices matter and which ones were never meant to shape your story. It brings you back to yourself. And in that returning, you find a quiet kind of power, the kind that no false headline, no cruel comment, no distorted version of your life can take away. There is always a choice. That's one of the most powerful truths I've come to understand. You may not be able to choose what happens to you. You may not be able to choose what people say, or how they spin your story, or what version of you the world wants to accept or reject. But you always have the choice to stand in light, to walk in it, to be it, even when everything around you tells you it would be easier to fold into the shadow. When the noise gets loud, and oh it gets loud, and the accusations start flying from corners you didn't even know existed, it's easy to want to hide, to retreat, to shrink, to say, let them believe what they want. I don't have the energy to fight lies with truth. But then, I remember something I've carried with me from the very beginning. Light does not run, it doesn't cower, it doesn't argue, it simply shines, and the darkness cannot stay where light. There have been many times in my life where I've stood in rooms filled with people who misunderstood me, doubted me, even hated me, and I had to remind myself, This is not about you. This is about their fear of your light. And sometimes, that fear is louder than any words they say. It shows up as mockery, as judgment, as cruelty wrapped in clever phrases. But no matter what form it takes, its goal is always the same: to dim you, to make you doubt who you are, to trick you into forgetting that your light was not given by the world, so the world cannot take it away. There's a cost to walking in truth. I won't sugarcoat that. You lose things. Sometimes people, sometimes opportunities, sometimes the illusion of comfort. But what you gain is something far greater. You gain the kind of freedom that no title, no check, no applause can match. The freedom of alignment, the freedom of living in such a way that your soul can rest, even when your name is being pulled through the mud, because your soul knows who you are, and when you know it too, really know it, no lie, no scandal, no misunderstanding can destroy that foundation. I have walked through storms, I've faced shadows that tried to convince me I was no longer worthy of light. I've had days when I wanted to disappear, when the burden of being known, being watched, being judged, felt too heavy for one woman to carry. But every single time, without fail, I found my way back to the light, sometimes crawling, sometimes crying, but always moving forward. Because light is not about perfection, it's not about never being questioned, never being accused, never being challenged. It's about standing in the truth of your intention, and my intention always has been to uplift, to heal, to expose the lies, not with rage, but with wisdom, to meet hate, not with hate, but with boundaries and grace. And that kind of light has a pulse of its own. It doesn't go out when storms rise, it burns steadier. There are people who will never see me for who I truly am. They've already decided who I must be, and you know what? That's okay, because I don't walk for them. I walk for the young girl who grew up in Mississippi, who was told she would never be more than what others imagined. I walk for the women who feel small under the weight of lies. I walk for truth, not the trending version, not the popular version, but the soul-rooted, spirit-led truth that stands even when it's not believed. And I walk for light. I walk in light, even when it's lonely, even when it's mocked, even when it's misunderstood. Because I've seen what happens when you let the world convince you that your light doesn't matter. You lose yourself. You disappear inside the stories others write for you. And I refuse to vanish. So I'm still here, still shining, still speaking, not because I need validation, but because I've come too far to abandon my calling. Let the shadows talk, let the headlines spin, let the opinions fly. My light doesn't answer to them. It answers to the deeper knowing, the voice inside me that has never lied, never betrayed me, never led me anywhere but forward. And to anyone out there who's facing their own storm, who's being misunderstood, lied about, blamed, dismissed, I see you. I know what it costs to keep standing, but I also know what it gives you. Keep walking in your truth. Keep choosing your light, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who have learned how to shine.